Director of the Doctorate in Educational Leadership, and we are so honored today to host a Fulbright Scholar.
Yeah.
I think this is a first for us, at least since I've been here. I also want to welcome those of you around the world that are watching on YouTube, that are watching live on Periscope. We're also glad that you could join us here at California State University Sacramento campus. Dr. Mariam Orkodashvili is here joining us today. She's going to talk about higher education and some of its implications internationally. And so we're so glad that you're here with us today. And without further ado, we look forward to your talk.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here, and thank you for inviting me to give this speech. And so I'm a Fulbright Scholar visiting, as you know. And so my topic today will be about higher education transformation in transition countries. Specifically, I concentrate on the post-Soviet and Eastern European countries who are going through huge changes regarding transforming higher education, and what is the role of governmental interference, and how is it related with the strive for autonomy, accountability, and what is the balance between autonomy, decision-making, accountability, and funding issues, which almost all universities in Eastern European countries are facing at present. Right. So first of all, the discourse is characterized by power control. So the governments are very much involved in the decision-making of hiring, firing, dismissals, departmental retrenchments, and mergers of universities in many cases, especially state universities. When I mention this, public universities and state universities are most affected, because private universities are luckier in this case, but they have more decision-making power, but they are striving for more funding and for competition and attracting the students, right? So there is another type of struggle going on there. And so most accreditation bodies are governed or directed by ministries of education, and there are liaisons, unofficial liaisons between university, top administration, and government in in most cases, very often. And the metaphors and language of power you can hear while they are discussed. So it is discussed through TV channels, through media, through public a lot. So they know, they are aware of it, public is aware of it. And so low trust, dishonesty, low quality, conflict, ensure governmental authorization, so academic freedom or unfreedom, low autonomy or high autonomy, it's mentioned a lot of the times. And what are the consequences of centralized university governance? There is no guarantee of academic freedom, no staff protection from dismissals. Academic councils or boards or regions are mostly appointed by rectors or chancellors or the top governmental official, top university official. And then, regarding chancellor and rector duties, there is another issue there. So a lot of the times, chancellor actually duplicates the duties and obligations of the rector. And so there is a public debate on how to differentiate these two positions and not to duplicate these two positions. And we get excessive administrative power as a result. So this is the organizational chart of top governing bodies generally. So like more or less, it varies more or less from country to country in Eastern Europe, but generally you get the rector at the top, academic council, vice rectors, and then deans, and then they are followed by heads of departments and faculty and administrators. But this is the highly, hierarchized structure that you see almost in all public or state university. Right, now if we trace the development of this higher education throughout the Soviet times and through the post-collapse period, so during Soviet times you could trace heavy-handed governmental control. So it was not even discussed whether the university had autonomy, or no autonomy. It was simply stated and regulated by the government. Now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we get unregulated manipulation and power abuse of different types of high university officials and political parties, and everything was unregulated, chaotic during the 90s. And then we came to the 2000s, to the years 2000s, where the public actually realized that the education was put at stake, and their children and new generations were just left uneducated, and so public started discussing openly how to improve and make improvements to higher education system. And so that's why, so especially post-2005 period, it is called like period of reforms and the transitory shock effects for the corrupt individuals and institutions and systems. Transitory shock effects, they come from economics field. So when you conduct a certain kind of policy, and it brings unexpected reactions and unexpected behavior in organizations on individuals. Now, if you transfer this to the higher education field, transitory shock effects were like directed towards making the hirings or admission process more transparent. A lot of the countries like Georgia, Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, they introduced national examinations for entry, and the national examinations were freestanding bodies from the universities where the students just go and take exams there, and it is all anonymous and more objective, and they just get allotted to the university which they preferred. And the university does not take decision on which applicant to enroll or not, which was the case during Soviet time, and it was all covered, and a lot of the times the process was ambiguous. So that's what you get from 2005 reform period. Theoretical framework, so I just look at the Western theoretical framework, how you restructure the university, how you reorganize. And so Burton Clark, Timajian, Powell, Gumpert and Sporn, and Mintzberg and Mussolin and Week, they produce the most important theories regarding the structural organization of higher education institutions. And so they talk about innovating and reorganizing academia, and especially they emphasize that higher education institutions are least adaptive institutions. They are most traditional, and so both academics and administrative staff often want to preserve their tradition. So how do you introduce these innovative ideas in the post-Soviet countries? And another extreme, we've got departments as loosely coupled systems, where there are many, many departments, and the public university is really huge, and there is a problem of communication between the departments and coordination. So on the one hand, you have this administrative power and strict rules. On the other hand, you have this complex structure of many, many departments and loosely coupled system, and you have to balance and bring those things together so that somehow you transform university that will be like Western type and more high quality and accredited and fully producing, serving the production and transfer of knowledge, what is the most, the primary main aim of the university. And so controversies, so weakly coupled system, professionalized bureaucracy, that's what you get there, professional bureaucracies, struggle for academic freedom, and discretionary power of administrators. And so when I talk about it like top administrators, and almost in all universities in those countries, you can trace these controversies between these two sides. As a result of mergers, then a lot of universities, public universities, decided to merge some research institutes. So during Soviet times, we had this structure that was the institution that was called Research Institute, that was not involved in teaching, but just academics would go and conduct certain kind of research there. But in post-Soviet time, they just lost the funding. There was no more funding because during Soviet times, they were getting funding from the government. But after the collapse of Soviet Union, a lot of these institutes lost the funding. So very often universities decided to merge those institutes, but then they got another problem. So like funding, because they could not distribute the salaries to staff, or they get excessive centralization, and heterogeneity of the university. Like you get an institute or a small college that had different tradition, and suddenly it became merged with another higher education institution that had different tradition. And so you get the clash of traditions, and they could not negotiate when it came to decision making. And so then you face the creation of groups disconnected from the VU institution's overall objectives. So if a small institute merged with a huge university, then the people working there, they had different mission. They were accustomed to fulfilling different duties. And now they had to get accustomed to absolutely different working structure and organizational tradition. And it was very often, especially with the old generation, it was very difficult to adapt. When new generation adapts quickly, but there was a problem with older generation. And of course, legislative gaps, serious legislative gaps. So what was legislative basis for running this huge university, and legislative basis of you running small college or small institute? They could have different legislative basis, and then when you bring them together, you might get clash of some statutes or some laws that govern those two institutions, and then negotiating those two different opposing sides is a bit difficult. And this legal basis for defining then the status of defining the higher education institution as public institution or private institution. So they started discourse on giving more independent and private status even to the public institutions, so that they would have more independent decision-making power. And what happened there was that allocation of resources, because the government said, okay, you want to be independent, you don't listen to me, you have no funds from me, go ahead and struggle for obtaining your own funds. So no government funding, decision-making, okay, there is decision-making, but when you don't have much funds, you can't make many decisions. And then a lot of disputes regarding land and building possession. So very often government says, this land and the building is mine. So this was governmental, government possesses this. Now, if I give you freedom and independence, so who is in charge of taking care of land and all the amenities and buildings? So, and there are a lot of disputes regarding that. Hiring procedures, again, so you go ahead and decide how you hire the professors or administrative staff. And research priorities, of course, because when they were funded by government, they could have more freedom to take this research that now they have to think really carefully which priorities to put and which research would bring more funds and less funds. And and of course, it affects for the search for independent external funding. And mostly at state and public institutes, you could see that search for external funding comes to academic staff, like individual academic professors. You just see that this individual academic professor, who was really high quality and highly qualified, struggles on his own and tries to reach out to his or her foreign colleagues and foreign foundations, and struggles on his own, so without the university actually interfering or helping him. And at its roots, so now I would like to tell you about the different countries, post-Soviet countries, and how many institutions, or what is the accreditation basis and freedom basis in all some of those countries. So actually, interestingly enough, so the first education seminaries and academies in Georgia started in the 6th century, which was called the Cultural Academy. And it was famous for philosophical and religious disputations with huge freedom of expressing your views or ideas. And then the first actual real university started in 1918, Tbilisi State University that I referred to, going on with the transformations. And it was very interesting. So this was just before Soviet army invaded. So this was the short independence period. And that's why the first statute that this university got was guarantee of academic freedom, right? and no interference from the government. But as soon as like Soviet Union formed in like those years, then they started occupying 1921, 22, so like joining on other countries, post-Soviet countries. So this statute was lost, right? But the founding like people, the professors who started this university, the first rule was the academic freedom. And this is just a picture of the academy, Culture Academy, so like church building and the seminary building, and of course the wars and all the struggles then did not allow this academy to develop, but the idea was that from the 6th century, actually there were some roots and foundations of academic activity. So entrance to this academy, I just wanted to illustrate some pictures. And these are actually the ruins where they had the halls for disputations and seminaries, where the philosophical disputations were held. Right, and at present we have 28 research universities, teaching universities, colleges, but so I just want to illustrate how much accreditation is influenced by governmental or Ministry of Education bodies. So we have Quality Assurance and Accreditation Center, which is governed by the Ministry of Education, the Tbilisi State University. Right. Oh, sorry. Okay. Right. Then, unlawful dismissals that happened during 2000, after 2000s, right, since 2005, a lot of professors were dismissed. And interestingly, there was no mechanism to protect the rights and interests of the dismissed professors, and the hiring criteria was also ambiguous. And there is Article 37, which is very ambiguous. So it states that actually your employer can dismiss you without giving the explanation why. And so a lot of the times, if you look at the dismissal orders or whatever statutes of these individual professors, it's written that this professor is dismissed by the Article of 37 and no further explanation. Then you go and search what this Article of 37 states, and you see that the employer is not accountable to anyone to say why, right? So then that's what you get. So you hire and you fire. So lack of information on hiring procedures. Then in 2010, another interesting issue happened. 172 professors dismissed and no information. And as a result, you got a lot of court cases. So this academic discourse is transferring to legal discourse, right? Okay, legal proceedings, and with accreditation, a lot of universities, they lost accreditation, then they started struggle with accrediting bodies, and so there were 30 cases, and 27 cases were actually won by accreditation body because it is governed by the Ministry of Education, who has more power. In Ukraine, so similar situation, so there are 300 state universities and private higher education institutions, research institutions, and institutes are governed by the ministers of education. For example, medical university is possessed or owned by the Ministry of Health. They give directions, and quality is conducted by collegium, special collegium, which is again affiliated with the Ministry of Education. This is National University of Kyiv, the most famous. Right. And military academies are under the Ministry of Defense. Police academies are under the Ministry of Interior. Diplomacy is under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And there is even University of Railway Transportation, which is governed by the Ministry of Railway Transportation. So you get this comical situation. Right. Azerbaijan. So here funding higher education is connected with the governmental control. Right, they still get, higher education institutions still get governmental funding, but it is not performance-based, and you never know how these individual universities are selected for getting this amount of money or that amount of money. And I talked to many Azerbaijani professors, and they could not give me could not provide an explanation how this money was distributed, what was the criteria. And education institutions is also, accreditation is also state-controlled, and in private sector, so private institutes are also accredited by state accreditation body. So even if you call this a private university, it goes for accreditation to the body that is governmental and controlled by the government. This is Baku State University. Right. Armenia, the same. So the strive for increased institutional autonomy and decrease in state funding. So again, there they are facing similar case that the government is saying, okay, if you want independence, you are independent, but I'm like decreasing the funding. Right. So there are 22 state higher education institutions with 14 branches, and 4 universities established within intergovernmental agreements with state participation again, and 40 private higher education institutions, but they passed accreditation through governmental accreditation body. Again, so tertiary, they are conducting tertiary reforms, but it is connected with decreased state funding. They want to join Bologna Process, but this Soviet legacy of highly centralized system does not permit conduct many reforms, right? So there's constant clash. There is a desire to join Bologna Process, but then you've got this highly traditional, hierarchized and hierarchical structures at universities. Okay, and hinders, and of course this formula of funding hinders market-oriented development in the country. And you've got here Yerevan State University. Okay, Belarus, a similar situation. There are accrediting bodies that are directed by ministers of education, and they have this national universities, state universities, which is again highly centralized. The same in Kyrgyzstan, similar. So, and 4 types of institutions. They have universities, academies, specialized higher education institutions, and they are governed by governmental decrees on higher education and governmental accreditation body again. Right. Moldova, the same, like number of 19 state institutions, and they must follow the national regulatory framework regardless of type of ownership, whether it is private or state institution. They have to follow the regulatory system directed by the government. Estonia is in a better position, of course. So Baltic States, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they are like closer to Eastern Europe, European countries, and a lot of Western European branches, university branches are opening up, and they are in a better position. But still, when I try to find out about accreditation, so accreditation is again affiliated with the Ministry of Education. And a similar condition with Latvia, Ministry of Education conducts accreditation, and Lithuania, right, the majority of which are private, 38 higher education institutions, but governmental center for quality assurance and accreditation. Russia is an interesting case. In 2005, they started a very interesting process of federalization of universities. So you get federal universities, meaning several research and huge universities merged, and they produced gigantic, huge universities, federal universities. And you get very complex and huge structure, and it is, of course, extremely difficult to operate and run this university. Well, it is heavily relied on individual academics who are top professionals and who just conduct their own top-class research, but you get it's a very unique structure there. So in addition to federal universities, there are national universities and other private higher education institutions, state university, interesting case is that different types of institutions are owned by different types of ministries, like in Ukraine. So you get here 24 federal ministries own different state universities, like Ministry of Education and Science owns 337 higher education institutions. Ministry of Agriculture, 58 higher education institutions. Ministry of Health and Social Development, 47 institutions. The Ministry of Culture and Mass Communication, 44. And there are 8 additional ministries that are in charge of different education institutions. So there's always kind of this higher education institution who is attached to the ministry, who comes both from government, and like all the regulations and laws are directed through the governmental body, right? And okay, as a result of this complex structure, a lot of like top academics or rectors or officials of universities who are exposed in some kind of corrupt or illegal deals, and they are conducting now investigations, and that's what you get. So, and it's not Russia specific. When I'm talking about this is Georgia specific, Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan specific, so it pervades the countries. And this is in Moscow State University, as most of you might know. So when I conducted the interviews and online surveys, the questions were regarding autonomy measures across these different countries, and percent of people who answered yes. So if they get more autonomy, so how it will affect different fields, like more autonomous entity as a result of change in legal status, so that they said that they would be more autonomous, more autonomy in selected university governing bodies, more autonomy in setting up new academic programs. Actually, it is interesting that academic programs and also autonomy in establishing relations with businesses got the highest number of yes. So actually, you get more governmental influence on funding and on administrative organization, but when it comes to establishing relations with businesses or research priorities, they get more independence and more freedom, which you can have a look at this color, which gives like more autonomy regarding new academic programs and establishing contacts with businesses. Right, setting performance measures, financial management and salary decisions get the lowest number of people answering yes, because salaries and decision making still get governmental control. Management, and also more autonomy in the management of premises and buildings. They say yes, but still very little percentage, because they are still skeptical, because a lot of the lands and buildings are controlled by the government. Effects of increased autonomy, so further questions like innovative curriculum here again, and employment-oriented courses. They got the top percentages there, and increased access and sharing of faculty resources got the lowest numbers, because resource and funding allocation still gets very, very heavy control. And decreased administrative costs and procedures, they are in the middle, right? And strengthened accountability measures also in the middle. So you get that innovative curriculum and employment-oriented courses get the highest level of, effect as a result of autonomy, so that they are free, the academics are free to decide on curriculum, study programs, and establish some research-oriented or job-oriented relations. Right, and so the countries like that I conducted is Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Belarus, Moldova, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, Russia, and Eastern European countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, and Macedonia, so that to conduct comparative analysis. Right, and so you get, as a result of it, low trust level, high number of legal cases throughout those countries. This is the tendency that you get a lot of legal cases either for dismissal, either for losing accreditation or closing down the departments. A lot of the time certain departments and programs were closed down, and so it caused disappointment among academics, and so they instigated legal cases. And so ambiguous criteria for evaluation, and this often directed by governmental interference. And so gradually academic discourse, as I said, is changing into legal discourse, which is very bad, because higher education institution mission is knowledge production and transfer. And so level of trust, so as to compare, so World Values Survey, I just looked at some cases, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, and Russian Federation. So as a result of all these legal cases and distrust, so you get such a high level of mistrust among each other, so can't be too careful. So whether you can trust people, most people can be trusted, and you get high percentage of no. Right, again, so the male and among females, and total number, right? You see, can't be too careful, that is, can't trust, so high percentage. And so, well, one way out of the situation could be like this any-canaric initiative coming from Europe, so European Network of Information Centers in the European region and National Academic Recognition Information Centers in the European Union, who could help with the accreditation process and with quality assurance, with establishing different programs and projects, in addition to U.S. higher education institutions with whom many institutes now are initiating like joint programs, dual programs, and higher education, like U.S. higher education institutions often send their consultants, their professors to give consultation and advice how to organize this process. To be considered, so horizontal, so the most important, horizontal peer-reviewed system of accreditation with more external experts, because what you get in most of those countries is that you have one accreditation body affiliated with the government or Ministry of Education, and hierarchical, centralized, and there is no one to control them with how transparent this process is. So when you get peer-reviewed horizontal process with the external bodies, then this process is more or less balanced, and you get more transparent and unbiased procedure for staff hiring as well, right? And present trends that you can notice is labor market connections, and these new programs are in the best, compared to other projects, in the best condition now. Tracing students through career paths, they just initiated a number of universities, and career counseling, starting especially with private universities who are struggling for funds, university company connections, internationalization through joint programs. Again, say for example, the 3 state universities in Georgia, they are affiliated with San Diego University here, San Diego State University. They have joint programs, and a lot of professors arrive from San Diego University and give advice and provide consultation. And joint programs with European universities. And I leave it with the question, not the answer, because I'm still searching for answers. Where to start when you start reorganizing such a huge institution like higher education institution in the transition country with a lot of economic problems and social problems? Structural reform, like institutional reform, do you start merging departments and institutes, or do you start with the replacement of people and you invite new people and they start doing this reform? So where do you start? There, with the institutions, or with the people? So this is the main question. Thank you for your attention. Right. Questions, if there are any questions?
So where are these countries now in their journey to reform their institutions? What's they're still at the stage there where things are the structures are still highly regulated?
Yeah, the structures are highly regulated, especially in large public institutes, universities. And even now, it's ongoing process. Even now, I'm just following through social media. 2 weeks ago in Georgia, the students of Tbilisi State University started protesting against this board of academic board and board of regions, and against a rector of heavy-handed regulations and actually funding decisions that are quite ambiguous. And they are demanding for the whole academic council and the rector to step down. And there are protests going on even now. Even yesterday I checked on social media, and they started again in other like wave of protests. So it's an ongoing process now. So private universities, because they want to attract students, they are more Western oriented, and they mostly hire the professors and academics who've been to Europe or to the United States, and usually the process goes smoothly because these Western educated professors or qualified professors, they help with their advice, and the top administration is also more liberal, and they more flexible, and so they are in a better position. But state and public universities are in the process of reorganization, so they openly, all of them state that they need Western type structure. But when it comes to real organization and real reforms, then you get a lot of resistance. And so they are in the process of struggle and, discussions. That's the process.
Is the university president or rector really the number one person, or is the party secretary still the number one?
Well, officially rector is number one decision maker and number one person in the university. But actually, very often he is also coordinating a lot of things with the Minister of Education and the governmental bodies and Education Committee in the Parliament. But there is Chancellor and there is Academic Council. But what happens at the State University is that these three bodies are actually quite well coordinated, and this Academic Council actually very often obeys the rector's decisions, right? So and that's why you get now student protests, that they see how centralized it is. So, and Chancellor, this institution of Chancellor is quite recent. And Chancellor directs this funding decisions and budget allocation, and so a lot of departments and students and academics are dissatisfied because it's not that transparent. So.
And there's no party secretary anymore for the university. It used to be the
party. That was during Soviet times, party. But since we no longer have this Communist Party or whatever, no, that's not the case, right? Mm-hmm.
Now, it would seem that some regulation could be good, particularly when we're working in a large institution. We want some structure, we want some efficiency, we want some standardization of practices across our large university. I understand some of this is to the extreme and bad. But also, I guess the question for you, you can also make the case for too much autonomy being bad. So I guess the question for you, should we strive for a greater balance between regulation and autonomy?
Yeah, that's what I actually mentioned. So who is specialist in loosely coupled system, so he calls the university, huge university, with many departments and schools and colleges, a loosely coupled system, meaning that these individual departments and colleges are not connected with each other, and all of them strive for independent decision making. And you get this miscommunication and lack of communication between these bodies. And that's why when the top administration takes some regulations and makes some decision, you get certain dissatisfaction or certain criticism from different departments, and you get these two extremes. Yeah, and that's what they are trying, especially in federalization, federal universities in Russia, they are now dealing with this issue because the top administration rector are struggling for establishing these regulations, but since this university is huge, and then you get a lot of academics who've already been to the West and been Western educated, they realize that whatever regulations are brought there are not always good. And this is the process. They are actually struggling. These are two extremes. That's why I showed in the slide that this is loosely coupled system versus professionalized bureaucracy, and they are just in a clash. Please.
I'm curious to what extent leadership styles in particular regions, or particular countries or cultures can influence the way that organizations are structured and organized and also run, and appointed bodies that are maybe moving more into kind of more autonomy, and seeing how those are also evolving in some of these regions, and if there are other, like how difficult is it to kind of shift the leadership style that's been so kind of set?
Yeah, leadership style is important, very important now. And especially when you deal with top university officials who are usually coming from old, traditional, heavy-handed leadership style, it's very difficult to convince them in the necessity of conducting real reforms openly on televised, on TV channels. Of course, they will agree with you with everything that, oh, sure, we are bringing our university close to US university or Western university, and we are trying to introduce US-type style. But when it comes to real reform, this is where this leadership style is really affecting. Well, if we have private institutions and they have this Western-oriented leaders, we are lucky. But mostly state universities don't get this young or Western-oriented. You might have some outliers or some exceptions in Baltic states, but general trend is that the state universities are heavily centralized, and there is no even very little number of programs or any workshops or anything to develop this leadership style and to raise the awareness of this true leadership style. They think that this leadership is this power control. So this is the problem, that they associate leadership with the power and control. And unless this leadership and power and control are separated, you don't get real results. And this is, of course, the issue there. Sure. Yeah.
I'm wondering if the admissions process for students has improved, or how has it changed in the post-Soviet reforms, and what the process is like during?
Right. So during Soviet times, each and individual university, they had their own entry examinations. And the information so the alignment between the curriculum that was taught at schools and the entry examinations, they did not coincide, and there was a huge discrepancy. And so especially high schoolers who were coming from the faraway regions, who had no access to the information on the entrance examinations and entry requirements in the major cities where the university was located, they had huge problems. Now, what you get now in a lot of the countries, in Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, they introduced national exams. Russia also introduced national exams, but they had some resistance from the professors that saying that, we still need to get involved in the admission process. So national examinations and national examination body is a freestanding body that is not associated with any of the university, and so it is anonymous, and all the students need to go and take exams there, and they just need to indicate the priorities of whether they want to be enrolled in that institute or this institute, and according to the number of points that they get at the exam and the selectivity of the university, they will be enrolled in this or that university. It has a little bit improved the situation, but then there is a matter of quality again. There's some professors are saying that the people who designed this examination and tests are not of high quality, and there are some real issues, and that it does not really reflect true abilities of a student. There are discussions in the US whether SAT would really reflect the potentials and abilities of a student, right? But the university looks not only at SAT but at the recommendations and the essay, statement of purpose. The whole application process is going there. Whereas there in our countries, you only have this result of this national exam, and according to these numbers, you just enroll this student in that university or this university. So, which is like not quite good, and it had huge resistance, especially in Russia. It had resistance from Moscow State University professors who were against it, but so they still started conducting these exams, and there are huge discussions going on there now, so that they want to incorporate some other indicators in addition to national exams, like recommendations from school or school GPAs or school performance or participation in so-called Olympiads. We have Olympiads, if you know. It's a kind of competition in different subjects, in maths, physics, biology, English, where students from different schools go and participate, and whoever gets high score is the winner of the competition. And if you have this participation, that they say it should count also towards the enrollment. So it's a complex issue. It has increased objectivity maybe and transparency, and a lot of students are more clear about the entrance examinations, but so again the issue of quality and the real indication of the abilities are under question still.
It would seem that you need to add to your question here. Maybe it's leadership reform.
Right, sure.
Because if you're a bureaucrat, bureaucratically oriented in your management approach, then of course that's going to equate to advocating for a centralized structure of institutions versus if you're more democratically oriented, then it equates to a decentralized.
Yeah, decentralized. Definitely. Thank you for this recommendation. I am going to incorporate this leadership issue quite. So this is my next step, to put in leadership there, right?
And how many days of the national entrance examination is due? Once a year?
Once a year, end of June, July. So 2-3 weeks, from end of June throughout maybe mid-July, or so if they want to take extra, there is an option to take four exams are a must, but there are some faculties that might require extra, say, examination. If it is STEM, it's like physics, chemistry, you need to take extra examination, and if you take 5th exam, so then it stretches longer, but usually it's in July, so end of June, July, and then they get results at the end of August. So the whole summer is very nervous for those entrants, for the parents, for the families, and for the students. Yeah, it's a huge issue.
Thank you for the presentation. This is really
Thank you.
interesting. I think that kind of post-Los Angeles discourse in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, is a fascinating study. And the idea is, I'm afraid of autonomy now, so this one is their autonomy, it's state protection. But how did you find the lens of critique that would fit what it was that you were investigating? You used some terminology from the economics, you used a little bit with the economy, use your theory, work theory.
Bits and pieces from all different disciplines, because shockwaves, transitory shockwaves, it's coming from economics. So it's a major economics term where you conduct certain policy and got the shock from the organizations or individuals that are directly affected by this and how they change their behavior. So when you introduce new policy and you see how higher education institution changes behavior, it is very important whether they change their policy, whether they change enrollment policy, reorganization policy, staff hiring policy. So it's coming from economics. Leadership style, right, I'm going to incorporate it. And so all the other are major education field things from higher education, organizations, structural organization and management, like Mintzberg and Gumpert and Horn, they are just mainly coming from organizational structures and organizing bodies.
Can we conceive of a solution outside of political economy?
Solution. A solution could be adaptability, as far as I understand. Although people state that higher education institutions are least adaptable and most traditional institutions, when you have this transition period and when you realize that you have to really raise the quality. So adaptability to the environment, adaptability to the changing job market and employment, adapting to international atmosphere, seeing that, you know, Western European or US universities are moving in that direction. So just adapting to the ongoing process, I think this would be the best outcome. So that being flexible and seeing, you know, how it would work, and also not centralized, but just decentralized and peer-reviewed system, right? So that you listen to people, listen to professors, listen to academics who tell you that hey, this is not the right policy, it will bring certain negative issues. So you just listen to the people and see how it follows. I think adaptability and flexibility would be the best solution in this case. Any other questions? Right. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.